Lakuta Sichas Chelik Yud Zayin, Pirkei Avos, Perek Chamishi, the first Sicha. Lili Nishmis Rabbi Yosef Binyamin ben the Menashe Kaltman. This is a beautiful, short, relatively short Sicha that talks about the Mishnah, that tells us about the things that were created Be'erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos. Ben Hashmashos is the time period after Shkia, after sunset, before Tzeisak Echavim, before dusk. It is neither day nor night. The day ends halachically at Shkia. The night begins at Tzeisak Echavim at dusk. And so there's this twilight zone between Shkia and Tzeisak Echavim, which is called Bein Hashmashos. And the Mishnah tells us about various different things that were created at that time. In Heintiken Perek Rechen Tois der Tana Asara Dvarim was Nivru Be'erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos. The Tana tells us 10 things that were created on Erev Shabbos, which means the 6th day of creation, the 6th day of Sheishes and Mebreshis, Bein Hashmashos, between in this twilight zone between Shkia and Tzeisak Echavim. Denach bringt noch Hadeya as Af Kivrei Shel Moshe Rabbeinu ve'Eli Shel Avram Avinu. There's another opinion in the Mishnah that also Moshe's burial place, which miraculously nobody can ever find, and the ram of Avram Avinu, the ram that appeared at the Akedas Yitzchak, those two things were also created at Erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos. Uniz Mesayim, and then the Mishnah concludes v'yesh emrim, another opinion, af hamazikin, also these destructive demonic forces made up of negative energy. Af tzvas b'tzvas asuya, and then the Mishnah says also a tongs is made with another tongs. What does this mean? The pirush from tzvas b'tzvas asuya is the Gemara zaktim psachim. This idea is also discussed in the Gemara Psachim, and the Gemara explains over there, tzvas can gemacht werden, wenn man benutzt dabei an ander tzvas. To make a tongs, you need another tongs to hold it. You're forming it out of the metal. To make the proper shape, you need another tongs to hold the one that you're shaping. Stellt sich die Scheile, wer hat gemacht die erste tzvas? So if you go back to the first one, the one that you have now was made with another one. That one was made with another one. Who made the very first one? Zogtman, and so this is what the Mishnah is telling us, as the erste tzvas is given abriya b'dei shamayim. The first one was created by the Eibishter himself, und die tzvas, and that one, the miraculous one, that was the very first one to be made, that was made by the Eibishter, is b'shafin givaron Be'erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos, was also created at Erev Shabbos on the 6th day of Sheishes and Mebreshis, on the 6th day of creation, after the sunset, before the night. Davon verstehen, so we have to understand, what's the Sheiches von Brias HaTzvas zum Zman von Erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos? What's the connection between creating a tongs and Erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos? But hier, die andere Sachen, was werden gerechnet in Mishnah, seine Mefarshim Maz mit dem Tam, for was Brias gewinnt bei Erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos. The other items, the 10 items that are discussed in the Mishnah earlier, that they were created on Erev Shabbos in this twilight zone, is explained by the Mefarshim what their connection is. Since these things are supernatural, they're not part of the normal order of nature that was created during the rest of the 6 days. They are miraculous things. Therefore, they were created in a time that was very close to Shabbos. Which Shabbos is the time of resting and stopping from creating things of nature. So, Shabbos you can't create it because Shabbos is total menucha. And during the 6 days of creation you can't create it because these are miraculous things. They're not part of nature. So Erev Shabbos Ben Hashmashos, once the 6 days ended, before Shabbos began, the Avos created various different things that are miraculous, that are supernatural. But the idea that the very first tongs was created with a tongs, and we need one to be created at first, is really, this concept is a natural concept. This is how it happened, and in a way, it would even be a greater chiddush that it's happened in other things, such as animals. And every animal was created by the animal that gave birth to it. And at a certain point, there was one animal that was created by the Eibishter that later began to give birth to the next generation of animals. Similarly, vegetation, trees, plants, and things like that. Everything that we plant today is planted with seeds that came from another one. And then there was one in the very beginning that the Eibishter created. Die Metzias von Aspetedikin Balchai, oder Tzemeach, muss ankommen zu Afrierdikin bis zum Divre B'dei Shamayim. Every animal and every part of every plant had to be created by a previous one. So why is it out of all of these things that tzvas was created out of Shabbos ben Hashmashos? Why not the chicken? The chicken also gave birth to, laid the egg, and more chickens came from it. Like everything started somewhere in Sheishis and Mebereshis. So if it was a ness, is one thing, but the fact that something was created and later things came from it, that's not a ness. So why specifically the tzvas? Nachmer Tmiyah. The question is even greater. The Gemara sagt in der Sanhedrin as a town, was Adam Rishon is given something going to be Mashishi. Noch alle Nivroim, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, why was Adam Rishon created on the last day, on day 6 of creation? After everything else, so you should find everything prepared. You should be able to sit down to the meal right away. What does it mean, the meal? We'll see later in the Sikha. The meal means the world. The world should be all ready for him. You shouldn't have to come to the world and there's no sun, there's no moon, there's no animals. The world, you should come to a ready-made world. Now, as the erste tzvas is beschaffen geworden by the Shabbos ben Hashmashos. So according to the above, that the very first tongs was created Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos, noch Brias Adam Rishon, which would be after Adam was created. He was created earlier on Friday afternoon. Kumtois, as is nicht given hakoil muchan, weil die tzvas is noch nicht given muchan. Then not everything was ready for him. If the whole purpose was that everything should be ready and waiting for Adam Rishon, you have a tzvas. The tzvas was not there for him. From the other 10 things, it's not really a question. They were all designated for later days. They weren't ready, and therefore they weren't necessarily, they didn't need to be prepared for Adam Rishon. The Bilam's donkey wasn't needed until Bilam's times, and the opening of the earth that swallowed up Kairach wasn't needed until Kairach came. There was no part of Adam Rishon that needed to be involved in those things. Aber tzvas is lechere nitken yetzem in aklal for the makel muchan. Was nemt al nivram v'sheish v'bereishis, but tzvas is a tongues, something that could have been used by Adam Rishon. Maybe it even was used by Adam Rishon. It's part of the regular creation. So how could the Adam Rishon come into the world and the tzvas is not there? So basically, we have one major question: what is the connection between tzvas and Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos? Why the tzvas did Hashem wait until Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos? And how could we say that Hakoil Muchan if Adam Rishon was created before it? We have another couple of questions, another few questions. Aleph, Avos sagt das durch der Heidov as ve'af tzvas betzvas asuya. Was in die Werte redt sich nicht wegen der Brie von der ersten tzvas. The way it is stated in the Mishnah, unlike the previous says va'af hamazikin va'af el kivrei shel Moshe Rabbeinu, and also it gives a statement that if you have a tongs, this tongs was created with a previous one, which means he's not even talking about the one that was created in Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos. He's talking about the one that you have in your hand, the one that you have now. Adrabah, bepashtus meites aspetedike tzvas, but z is asuya from afridike tzvas. The way it sounds in the Mishnah, it's talking about a later tongs that was created from a previous one. Nor von dem drink bin aruis as gar die erste tzvas gemuzan abri b'deshamayim. It's just that by looking at the tongs today, we can figure out that the very first one was created by Hashem. Und von dem, was stellt the meaning in der Mishnah, from the fact that that it's placed in this Mishnah, not in a different Mishnah, versteht man, as der Mitwil, die Mishnah sagen, as the tzvas is beschaffen geworden, Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos, and therefore we conclude that it must be that there was a tongue that was created Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos. It doesn't say that the first one was created Erev Shabbos. He says a tongue that you have now was created from another one, which means it has to go back to one that was created by Hashem, and then he puts it in this Mishnah with the things that were created out of Shabbos ben Hashmashos. So we must conclude that the Mishnah is telling us that the very first one was created out of Shabbos ben Hashmashos. The Mishnah could have just said very clearly and very concisely, also the tongues. And that's actually how the Gemara talks about it in Psachim. Rabbi Yehuda says also the tzvas. He didn't go into the whole statement of tzvas, tzvas, asuya, like it does in this Mishnah. Also the tzvas. So that's our first question. Our first question of this if. Why does the Mishnah not just say v'af tzvas and instead gives us a statement av tzvas v'tzvas asuya? Based von dem was die selbe Yudesh, sorry. Von dem was die selbe Yesh Omrim seinen Moshe die zwei Sachen. From the fact that there is the same opinion in the Mishnah that adds two details, mazikin und tzvas, is verstandig as sie haben an nekudim mishutefes. Was zu lieb dem sein sie beide leider shita michedes von Yesh Omrim beschaffen geworden bei Shabbos ben Hashmashos. The fact that they're both included both said by the same Yesh Omrim, the same opinion, it seems that this Yesh Omrim sees a connection between the two of them. And mistakas von der Lashon v'af tzvas, nit utzvas v'chulu, wie bei der Friedrich Yesh Omrim af kivrei ve'eloi chulu, is mashmaz mazikin und tzvas eine besondere Pratum. In the previous Yesh Omrim, it said the first time it said af, and the second item it said ve. It said af kivrei shel Moshe Rabbeinu ve'eloi shel Avram, which seems to be closer connected. Here it says af hamazikin ve'af, which implies that they're two separate ideas. Aber doch muss man sagen, as they haben atzad hashava, but they must have some sort of common theme. Was leichitas Yesh Omrim is a machriach zum Eisa sein zei after Friedrich Kedeis, which brings this Yesh Omrim to include both of them in his opinion. We have to understand what is the common theme between the mazikin, these destructive demons, and the tzvas, the tongues. Gimel. Was ist die Hera in Avedas Hashem Bechlal? Ubefrat in Mili de Chasidusa tegen Mesechte Avos, was man lernt heraus von dem, was va'af tzvas v'tzvas asuya. What is the lesson in Avedas Hashem? Especially we know, the Gemara tells us that the Meseches Avos is to teach us Mili de Chasidusa, ideas of piety. So how do we, things that are beyond the letter of the law, what kind of lesson do we take from this? That from this fact that the Eibishter created a tzvas, the very first tzvas, and from there, from that, all of the other tongues were created. The other 10 things or 12 things that are mentioned in the Mishnah at least have some connection to Yidden. To Yidden in history, a Jewish life. The Mefarshim explain that these things were created by the Eibishter for the benefit of the Yidden. Aber tzvas hat nicht kein besondere Scheiches dafke zu Yidden. Weil achas v'kam zu der Aveda for Yidden. The tzvas does not seem to have any special connection to a Yid. Certainly not to the Aveda of a Yid. So what is our takeaway from this fact that av tzvas b'tzvas asuya? So number one, what's the connection between tzvas and that of Shabbos ben Hashmashos? Why was it created after Moshe Rabbeinu, after Adam Harishon? Why does Mishnah say it in this kind of statement, av tzvas b'tzvas asuya? What's the connection between the mazikin and the tzvas? And what is the hera? What is the takeaway, the lesson, especially in Mili de Chasidusa, in the ideas of piety, from this concept of the tzvas being created from another tzvas, and the first tzvas being created out of Shabbos ben Hashmashos. Wenn wir das verstehen, beachtet dem Pirush Pnimini in der Maimer Chazal Anal, as Adam Harishon is beschaffen geworden b'yom shishi. So to understand this Mishnah, we're going to begin by first explaining this other Maimer Chazal that we learned, that Adam Harishon was created on the 6th day of creation. Noch dem was alt is given muchan, after everything else was ready and prepared. Kidei sheyikonis l'suuda miyad, so that way he should be able to enter into the meal right away. And das meint as soll haben als muchan zu kennen ton gleich sein Aveda. What does it mean? He should enter to the meal. In the deeper dimension of Torah, he's telling us that Adam Harishon should be able to start his Aveda, his work, his task, his mission on this earth. He should be able to begin right away. Warum sie zaklal? As kol masha nivra b'sheishes mebreishes tzrichin asiyah. The rule is, the principle that we're taught is that everything that was created in the 6 days of creation was created in a way that is imperfect, that is not 100% finished, so that way the person or the people should have to rectify it and perfect it. Asher bara elikim lasais, Hashem created to make, So from this we learn Lisakin, that the Avos created it for the purpose that we should rectify it, that we should perfect it. And the rectification happens by the hands of the human being. Und das meint die Seude von Adam Rishon. Die Sachen, was darf haben für seine Avoide, kol mas niver bescheißen Hebräisch, was darf sagen sein. That's what it means that Adam Rishon was going into a meal referring to the things that he has to do for his Avoide, referring to everything. Everything that the Avos created in Sheises and Hebräish was then waiting for Adam Rishon to complete it and rectify it. Parenthetically, das ist echt der Bier Pnimi, weil was die Sachen, was seine Beschaffung geworden bei der Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, seine nicht von Sudus und Adam Rishon. This also explains why the things that were created out of Shabbos ben Hashmoshes are not part of Adam Rishon's meal. Meal here is in quotation marks, referring to his Avodah. It's not part of Adam Rishon's Avodah. Und wie bald das jeder dit bedeutet Adam Rishon, Atem Kruyim Adam, is move on as a geheren euch nicht zu der Suda Avodah von Eden auf ihres Beter Dikederes. And consequently, we understand from here that since we take the place of Adam Rishon, we follow in his footsteps, we have to fulfill his tasks, as we know that the Yidden are called Adam. So if it wasn't part of Adam Rishon's Avodah, it's not part of our Avodah either. Why not? They're not ready and prepared for the person's Avodah. Because they do not require any perfection or any rectification by the hands of the human being. The Eibishter initially created them finished and ready. And this is also why they were created out of Shabbos ben Hashmoshes. Bismichis to Shabbos, very close to Shabbos. Was demelt is this man von Tainug Menucha von Asiya v'Amal, which Shabbos is the time of pleasure, of resting from our work and our toil. So since these things do not need avodah, they belong to Shabbos, which is a time of resting from the avodah. So let's just follow what we said over here so far. That Adam Rishon was created for the purpose of rectifying the world. Everything that's in the world was created for the purpose, so that way they should be rectified by Adam Rishon, excluding certain exceptions, certain things that are not part of Adam Rishon's Avodah. Adam there's no need to do anything to them. They're ready and done. And therefore they were, not only were they not created before Adam Rishon, they also were created out of Shabbos ben Hashmoshes in a time that is very close to Shabbos, because they are representative of Shabbos, which is not a time of Avodah. Even though there is a concept of serving Hashem on Shabbos, so if we're not serving Hashem by fixing the world, what are we doing? Shabbos, the Avodah is not to refine and perfect the worldly matters, the material matters of creation. Shabbos is men Kaddish removed from Welt. Sachen in Yonichel. Shabbos we are sanctified, we are removed from worldly things, from mundane matters. Nor the Aveda is in Kedusha Gufa. Shabbos the Aveda is within Kedusha itself. So Eilaz I midarge ledarge. Was the father is the Aveda mitech tainug b'liyamo. We're not fighting the world to try to change the materialism of the world. We are safely ensconced in Kedusha, and our Avodah is to go higher and higher. So therefore it's considered a pleasurable thing. It's not Omo, it's not toil, because we're in Kedusha. We're just climbing higher within Kedusha. So there is Avodah Hashem on Shabbos, but it's Avodah Hashem with Tainuk, with pleasure, with enjoyment, because we're not fighting the world. So most of the things of creation is about perfecting it and fixing it, and that's the Avodah of Adam Rishon. The exception to the rule is the things that were created out of Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, that Adam Rishon does not have to do anything to them, and their creation therefore is not considered Amol v'Yagiyah, and therefore they were created right near Shabbos. Okay, so now let's see the same idea, but from the other perspective. So in other words, there is most of creation that was created for the Adam to do his work. There is certain things that are miraculous things that are higher than creation, prepared, created, fully ready and prepared, and therefore therefore they do not necessitate avodas ha'adam, the person's avodah, and therefore they belong to Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos. In Sif Dalet is going to say that there are also things that are lower in a certain sense than creation, and therefore the Adam cannot do any avodah to it. They're not ready. They're not high enough for the Adam's avodah to work, and they too fit into Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos, as we will see. Just like we said that the above mentioned 10 things, and the avodah on Shabbos does not fit in to the task, to the meal of the Adam, because inherently they are higher than the rest of creation. And therefore they do not lack the perfection which the person would have to fix. There is also in the opposite extreme that are on their own, that are not ready for the person to do their avodah. Because they are lower than the creations of the 6 days of creation. And the person doing his regular, organized, regular, systematic avodah cannot get to them. They're too low. Nor from Mesiris Nefesh, from Bechal Me'edcha, Hecher von seiner Tivistik Hagbalis. Normally we say V'chai B'hem, that when a person does a mitzvah, a person should live from the mitzvah. A mitzvah is supposed to bring to life. That is the Seder Avodah, that a person does a mitzvah, V'chai B'hem. There's 3 mitzvahs that we say a person is Yehareg Val Yaver. Then there's a concept of Mesiris Nefesh. Mesiris Nefesh is not normal. Mesiris Nefesh is when a person goes out of his regular koiches and reaches for something that he's ready to give his life away for it. So the only way to fix these things that are lower than creation is when a person is on a level that his life doesn't matter, so to speak, where he's ready to give up his life. Then he can go outside of himself and go low enough to lift up those things that are lower than creation. And because inherently, without Mesiris Nefesh, these things are not part of the person's avodah because they're too low down. These things also don't fit in to the meal, namely the tasks of the avodah of the person. Is in an eif from V'chai B'hem, say the Vadra. Because Avedis Adam, the way it was established initially, supposedly, is that it's supposed to be in a systematic way, in an orderly way, which is the way of V'chai B'hem, and not that a person should be Moshe Nefesh to deal with these low down creations. Uvidas and Merum is in them, and this contrast between the person's regular avodah and the person's avodah of Mesiris Nefesh is actually alluded in the word Adam, or in the letters of Adam, which can either spell Adam or Ma'od. Uvidas Merum is in the same Adam, but the AC is Aleph, Daled, Mem, Weiss, and Kiyadua, Avtzir, Mesuda, and Adam. Aleph comes first, Daled is second in the order of the Aleph Beis, and Mem comes later. And this is the Rosh Gufa Regel. Also, Machshava Diber Maisa, Aleph is Machshava, which is just the person himself. Dalid stands for the word Dibur. Mem stands for the word Maisa. So Adam is the Seder. The way first it's in a person's Machshava, then it goes into his Dibur, and then it comes out in Maisa. But that's a Seder. That's in an orderly manner. Aveda Misudara, an orderly Aveda. Mash'ein came b'chol me'edecha. Is then means mehapich dem tzid of Adam. Me'edecha is when we change around the order of the letters, and then becomes the inyan from Ma'od, Echer from Agbala, then Adam becomes Ma'od, which is higher than limitations, higher than the confines of the person's orderly Aveda. So, there's 2 reasons why something would not be created during Sheishis Mebreshis and Wait of Shabbos. Either it's beyond creation, it's higher than creation, and has no need for the person's rectification, or it's lower than creation, and the person cannot rectify it in his Aveda Misudara, in his regular day-to-day Aveda. And therefore, you can't create it out of Shabbos, in Sheishis Mebreshis, because the person can't deal with it. And therefore, it was created out of Shabbos ben Hashmashos. Und das ist was die Yeshayim seine Meisiv af hamazikim av tzvas. Now we'll go back to our Mishnah and we'll understand. Now that we understand that there are certain things that are below creation, so to speak, and we'll understand this last Yeshayim in the Mishnah. Mazikin seine nicht kein Sachen in welcher es ist da Tikkun Avedas Adam. Mazikin are sometimes referred to as shadim. Mazikin are these like spiritual, meaning they're not physical, material creations. They're destructive. They are connected with negative energy, and they could create destruction. Mazikin. So they're not something that a person could fix. Aveidav says to Masakin sein. Zeir Metzias is sich geschaffen mitzad Mecheta Adam, und Aveidossi is Shelo sein, mit Ma'abed sein. They were created through sin, and the Aveid of a person is to get rid of them, to destroy them. Even though the ultimate goal is that they should be transformed to good, tell us with regards to when Mashiach comes, that the Chayis Rois, Mashbisan, he's going to make them rest. He's going to stop them so they shouldn't hurt, they shouldn't damage. Sie seien aber nicht mazik, uis mazikin, that they should become non-destructive. Is das aber nicht ein von Asiya v'tikkun and zei gufa. This doesn't mean that they become changed. It doesn't happen because all of a sudden you reveal the goodness that is concealed within them and they become a lemalach, little lambs. Their entity, their definition is that they're destructive. How do we rectify them? By reinventing them. We turn them into something new. We change what they are. We redefine them, and therefore they stop being destructive. But to fix them, they can't be fixed. They could be redefined, they could be reinvented, but they can't be fixed. And that's the connection between the creation of these destructive forces and Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes. Is there Metzias, is there Tachlis, as they are created from above, their ultimate goal, their ultimate purpose, and therefore their definition is that in the end they will be transformed to good. Und der Far is their Bria Milamaila, given Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, and therefore their creation from above was in this time of Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes. Weil od der Chiddush in die Mazikin shel Yaziku hat nicht kein Ort mitzad Gidrei HaTeva von Welt. Sheishes und Bereses. Nur davke mitzad dem Koyach von Shabbos, was das Hercher von dem Medidus von Welt. This ultimate transformation, that they will become transformed or reinvented, as we said before, and become good, this has to happen from above. This cannot happen through the person's avodah. And therefore, it has to be created in a miraculous time. It has to be created in a time that is not limited by the confines of this world. Because the only future, the only hope for the mazikin is milamaila, from above, which created them in a way that they should be changed into good or reinvented into good, and therefore they have to be created in a time that they won't be limited to the rules of Sheishes and Mebereishis. Und this also is why they're not part of the person's meal, of the person's avodah. Wie bald as der Tikkun von die Mazikin is durch dem, was der Adam geht heraus von sein Adam, seine tivistische Agbalus. Because to rectify them cannot be done through the person's regular avodah. It's only through the person's avodah when he goes into mode of Mesiris Nefesh, beyond his limitations, and therefore it's not part of his meal. So there's two nekudas here. Why it wasn't in Sheishes Mebereishis, and why it was Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes. Why it was Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes is because ultimately their hope, their future is dependent on a supernatural place, a supernatural origin, and therefore they were created in a supernatural time. And why wasn't it during the Sheishes Mebereishis? Because it's not part of the person's Avodah Mesudara. It's not part of the person's orderly or systematic Avodah. Okay. Now let's go to the tzvas. So far, what we're saying is like this. We're saying that the Eibishter created certain things that are not part of the person's Avodah, either because they're ready and done, or because to fix them needs Mesidus Nefesh. And the regular person in the regular day cannot fix it. Mazikin go into this last category, that they cannot be fixed by the regular person, only when they're in a mode of Mesidus Nefesh, but ultimately they will become reinvented, an inyan shel chidush, where they will not be mazik, they will not be destructive, but that's milamaila, and therefore they were created milamaila from above in this supernatural slot of time. Now let's go to the tzvas. And now the Yeshayim adds that also the tongues was created with the tongues. For a similar reason to the mazikin, is also the tongues is something that was created out of Shabbos ben Hashmoshes. Now by tzvas is das nit azevi ba mazikin. But their father is a medaik v'av tzvas. It's just the tzvas is not a destructive force. So it's not the same exact thing. And if it doesn't say v'hat tzvas, it says v'av tzvas because they're similar reasonings, but they're not exactly the same. When the asbara in them is vayel tzvas b'tzvas asuya. The explanation over here is why was tzvas created by Shabbos ben Hashmoshes? Because the tzvas creates another tzvas. And here's a detail that we did not see yet in the Sikha. That's very important to the rest of the explanation. Mit den Loschen Tzvas b'Tzvas Asuya wird herausgebracht, als die Matora Sabria von der erste Tzvas ist given uis Schlisslach zu lieb dem, als man soll kennen machen, danach a zweite Tzvas. The fact that the Mishnah says the Av Tzvas b'Tzvas Asuya, that the later Tzvas was created by an earlier tzvas, from this we can understand that the Mishnah is telling us that the very first tzvas, the first tongues, was created exclusively. Oishlislach means exclusively for the purpose of making another one. It's not like we've created a tongues, maybe we created a tongues which should be used for what tongues are used for, and also to make another one. The very first tongues was created only to make another one. That was the only reason that it was created. All the Nivraim von Sheishes Mebereishis, die Sachen, was von sie kommen, da ist Adam mit Seber gemacht, noch andere Sachen, everything else in Sheishes Mebereishis, including things that other things that can produce or propagate, or other things can be made with it or through it, because of it. We're created with a dual purpose, not only to create other things, not only to bring offspring into this world, but also for itself, to be able to be whatever it's supposed to be. Aber die Bria von der erste Tzvas is given be'efen as in it is nit given kimator b'tachas for sich. The very first Tzvas was created in a way that it had no self-purpose. Ir ganze Bashaf is given nor to lieb Tzvas v'tzvas asuya. The entire purpose of creation was only to create another one. As the other Rishon soll mit Tirkenem machen a zweite Tzvas, the other Rishon should be able to use it to create another tongues. It's an incredible concept. Something that has no purpose other than to produce. Yeah, der Inyan was da in Welt is früher in Teira. Der Inyan von Tzvas Asuya in Teira is the Inyan von Hechsher Mitzvah. Everything in the world is going to have a source in Teira. The Teira is the blueprint of the world. So if we see this concept that something was created for something else, we're going to see this in Teira as well, and we're going to see this in the concept of Hechsher Mitzvah, something that is used to prepare for a mitzvah. The act of preparation of the mitzvah is not a mitzvah. It's just a conduit with which you could approach the actual doing of the mitzvah with something else. Like one of the most famous examples of Hechsher Mitzvah. We had this a few weeks ago with regards to Zdeinis Nasle Kazachis. Kursin eitzim lasis pchamin. You're allowed to chop down a tree in order to make coal. Lasis barzel to make metal. Liizma lemila for a mila knife, to make a bris. Was midi eitzim v'niktonki mitzvah. The wood that you're chopping down on Shabbos, or obviously in this case even not on Shabbos, the wood that's being chopped to make coal, to make metal, to make a knife, to do the bris, mila, is not the wood is not a mitzvah. They're only a preparation of a preparation, and sometimes even more than that. The wood is being chopped to make coal. The coal is being chopped, is being prepared to be kindled, to be made hot. It's hot to make metal, and the metal to make a knife with which to do a mitzvah. So you would think that the wood cannot be seen as a vessel for holiness because there's no mitzvah being done with it. If a person chops the wood and doesn't do the bris, there's no elokus, there's no godliness that comes into the world just because someone's chopping wood. Man cannot feel in sagen, as eine melubisch in der Mitzvah, wie man sagt es, you can't even say that they become included in the mitzvah once the mitzvah is done, like you would say in Tanya when a person eats food, and then he has in mind that he's going to serve Hashem with the strength that he gets from that food. Which the energy that he gets from the food then becomes included into the words of Teda Tefillah, or any other mitzvah that was done through with the energy that he got from the food. Because when you're eating food, the food is actually helping you it's giving you energy to do the mitzvah. It actually becomes part of the mitzvah. But the wood is not part of the mitzvah. The wood is it's two separate things that you're later going to use a totally separate object to do the mitzvah, and you just needed, in order for that object to become into being, you needed coal. To coal, you had to chop wood. But when you're standing holding the knife does not have any connection to the wood. So what we see from over here is that in Torah there's a concept of hechsher mitzvah, that something is being used to prepare for a mitzvah, and yet it has no shaykhis to the mitzvah. It's not considered part of the mitzvah. Similarly, the very first tzvas had no inner purpose. Because when you serve Hashem b'koyach achilahi, the food had a purpose. The food becomes part of the mitzvah. The food itself is the purpose. The trees that you're cutting the wood are not being mamshech elokus, are not bringing elokus into this world, they're not part of the mitzvah. So they have no purpose. They themselves are not elevated. Seemingly. That's what happened with the tzvas. The very first tzvas, had it not created the next tzvas, would be meaningless. Its entire purpose was to create the next tzvas. And das ist der Chiddush in der Mishnah. And that's what the Mishnah is telling us. As auf tzvas v'tzvas asuya. Eich die tzvas was is b'shafin geworden blaze mekidei mizol kenen machen durch ihre zweite tzvas. Although we just established, we suggested that the tzvas has no inherent value because its only purpose is to make another tzvas, and its only value is in the next tzvas, like a hechsher mitzvah that seemingly has no value because it's not about the hechsher, it's about the mitzvah. Comes the Mishnah and says, no, you have it wrong. The tzvas that was created for the purpose of creating another tzvas, the Eibishter himself, the highest and loftiest levels of the Eibishter, got involved occupied himself with creating this tzvas. And since this was created by the Eibishter, you cannot say that its entire purpose of creation is for something else. And once it was utilized to make another tzvas, it now has zero purpose or meaning. It must be that the tzvas, the very first tzvas, has its own inherent value, even though its purpose in life is to create another tzvas. And the reason that this is how it is in Gashmius is weil azay das in Torah. It's because the same thing is reflected in Torah. Aveda shall be tam vadas is an hechsher mitzvah talking tachas v'chshivus farzich. Even though in a regular systematic aveda, if you look at it from the regular perspective, you see that the logical approach is that the hechsher mitzvah has no purpose. Its only purpose is for the other mitzvah, is for the other thing of mitzvah. But if you look at it from the perspective of the Eibishter's ratzon, the desire of the Eibishter, the will of the Eibishter that it should be created, is netaking chilik zwischen der mitzvah gufa versus mamshech halakos and hechsher mitzvah. It's a different perspective. If you look at it from the Eibishter's ratzon, the Eibishter wanted this to be here, the Eibishter wanted this to be here. The Eibishter wanted this to be here for a hechsher mitzvah. The Eibishter wanted this to be here for the mitzvah itself. But the Eibishter created both of them. The Eibishter created both things. And therefore, it must be that each of them have an inherent value. So in other words, what we're saying is that when a person chops wood to make coal, to make fire, to make metal, to have a knife or a bris, in that very first piece of wood, even though its purpose is a hechsher mitzvah and seems like you're not doing a mitzvah with it, it's only a hechsher mitzvah, but there is a redeeming value to it. There is something there that the Ratzon Elyon created it. Und wenn a Yid steht mit a Bittel Elyon zum Ratzon Elyon, hecher wird sein Tam v'das, when a Yid stands in a state that he rises above himself, so he's in a total Bittel to the Eibishter, he goes beyond his own understanding. Is by him talking of Kimina in was der Ratzon Elyon besteht. It doesn't matter what the Eibishter wanted from it. Wie der alte Rebbe sagt, als afilu ilu nitztava lachtiv eitzim, was wollt nicht aufgetan kein Yichud am Shachas Elokus, is there das Mekayim mit demselben Koch. The Rebbe says, had we been commanded to chop wood, unrelated to the chopping wood for the knife or mila, and the Eibishter said, go chop wood, which means to say that there would be no purpose. A Yid puts on film, a Yid does a mitzvah, so it creates godly energy. Yichud Elokus, Hamshachas Elokus. But if the Eibishter said go chop wood with no purpose, we would do it with the same passion, with the same excitement as the Eibishter told us to put on film. Why? Because the Eibishter told us to do so. And beside the Ratzon Elyon, the Eibishter wants us to do it. Doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter what's accomplished by it. Whatever the Eibishter wants us to do, we do. And in that context, when you're looking at it from the Ratzon Elyon, then even if you're chopping wood, which is not itself a mitzvah, but it's part of a process which the Eibishter wants to happen, and the Eibishter put this wood into the world, then when we do this task, we are actually connecting with Elokus. We are highlighting the inherent value of this wood, despite the fact that a mitzvah is not being done with it. And that's the connection between this avoda, the avoda of rising above our Ratzon, our Tam v'das, to recognize the value in every aspect of creation, even something that seems to have no redeeming value. Since it's an avoda that is higher, that rises above the person's regular avoda. Und davon wird nicht tauschel euch benegea zu den Bruim Kashmim. As the Bria Satzvasik ben Berev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, because the Aveda that we're talking about is L'mayla Mitamadas. And we see the same thing in the physical creations of Hashem, such as the Tzvas that was created by Berev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, that tell us that everything that was created has an inherent value. What's the connection to the Mazikin? The connection to the Mazikin, the way I understand it, is that in order to be Mevarer the Mazikin, you need Mesiras Nefesh. Right? The only way to be Mevarer the Mazikin is when you go outside of your own Avodah and you recognize the value even in the Mazikin, and therefore you're able to be Mechadish them, to reinvent them, Mashbisan Shalei Yaziku. So Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes is the time when something is created that is connected to the person's Aveda, but only Aveda Mesiras Nefesh L'mayla Mitam v'das. Similarly, the tzvas is the Aveda of a person to recognize the value in things that have no value, things that have no purpose, other than no inherent value, no inherent purpose. And when can we do that? Only when we rise above our Tam v'das, to stand in a state of bittul to Ratzon Elyon, to recognize that if the Eibishter created this, it absolutely must have a value, and that is a time of Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes. And because our Aveda Erev Shabbos ben Hashmoshes is because in order to accomplish this, we have to go out of our kelim, out of our Tam v'das. Therefore, the time to create something like that begashmius is Be'erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos. Das is Eich Teira in Milad Chasadusa. So we answered all of our questions so far. Let's go quickly back to this. What's the connection of Tzvas and Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos is now very clear. That Tzvas represents things in the world that have no inherent value, and yet when you go l'mayla mitam vadas, you see that they have inherent value. Erev Shabbos ben Hashmashos is the time where we go above creation, where we go higher than the Avodah of Sheishas Mebreshis. What was our next question? Our next question is Adam Arishan, that it should have been Hakel Muchan. Hakel Muchan, the things that had to be prepared for Adam Arishan were only the things of Aveda Mesudara, only the things that are part of Adam Arishan's Su'uda. The Tzvas is not part of his Su'uda, the original Tzvas, the one that was created to create other Tzvasim, or Tzvasim, because that the value of that is only seen when you go to L'mayla Mitam V'das. The next question is, why does it say V'av Tzvas B'Tzvas Asuya? It says it in this way because he wants to talk about the first Tzvas. And he wants to explain that the first Tzvas has no inherent value other than the fact that it could create other Tzvasim. And nevertheless, if you look at it from Ratzon Elyon, from the perspective of Ratzon Elyon, you see it has a purpose. The connection between Mazikin and Tzvas is also because the Aveda with them is when the person is L'mayla Mitam V'das. The last question was, what is the Hira in Milad Chasidusa? Avifus is the Sifchas, das ist der Eich Hira in Milad Chasidusa. Avifus is Negia, die ist Askus von Aiden, Eichin in Yonim, was nicht mehr wie Hechsher Mitzvah. How important it is for a person to be involved with things, even though they only seem like a Hechsher Mitzvah. Sometimes you need to prepare for a Mitzvah. You need to prepare to be Mekadev another Yid. And in order to this is my own words, but I'm learning it within the words here. You have to engage in other things in order to draw that Yid closer to the Eibishter. So you might say, there's not a mitzvah to do these other things. So he says, this Mishnah teaches us the importance of being involved even in things that are not a mitzvah, things that are nothing more than an extra mitzvah. Umay Serav is a beautiful, famous story in the Gemara. The Gemara that tells the great works of Chia. He involved himself not just with teaching Jewish children, the preparations and the preparations of the preparations. He himself did all these things to prepare for the learning. He himself planted the flax. He himself weaved the nets. Gefangen Hirschen, he himself captured the deer. Gemacht Klav, he himself made parchment out of the skin of the deer. Ungeschrieben Chamisha Chumshei Terev, the Kinder, and he himself wrote out the 5 Chumoshim. This is very questionable. Why did he do it himself? Hat das nicht gekannt übergeben zu einem von seinen Talmidim oder Avodim, als soll sich vernehmen mit die Achanis. Couldn't he use one of his students or one of his servants that he should involve himself with these preparations? Preferably use someone who's not sitting and learning all day. Let someone else do this work. Because Reb Chia was a person who was dedicated to the Eibishter's Ratzon. Is by him the Zelba Mesira Unasina, the Zelber Koch, the same dedication, the same commitment, the same passion in the Inyanim von Hechsher, V'Hechsher, being in the Mitzvah Aleini has the same passion to things that are a preparation or a preparation to a preparation as he has in the Mitzvah himself. Because from our perspective, one seems more important than the other. Putting tefillin on a Yid seems very important, but other things that are going to that are going to attract the Yid to come, etc., so that you should be able to put on tefillin, that's a hechsher. That doesn't seem so important. Let someone else do it. Says Reb Chia, no. That's the perspective from this world. Look at the perspective of Bittul the Ratzon Elyon. You see that the Eibusha created this thing. The Eibusha created this thing so that it should be used to do the mitzvah. So therefore, they have the same amount of importance, and they should be engaged in with the same passion, and with the same excitement, and with the same dedication. So now we took a Mishnah, Av Tzvas V'Tzvas Asuya, which seems like a very simple, basic thing that the Eibusha created at tongues, and really telling us like this: the Eibusha created a tool that should teach us that everything that exists in this world, even something that does not seem to have a purpose, it has a purpose. And when we engage with it as a hechsher mitzvah, then it's as important as the mitzvah. And it belongs at Shabbos ben Hashmoshes because it's not part of Aveda Misudara, it's not part of Sheishes and Mibreshis, where we have to deal with the things that actually are mitzvahs and have value because of what's actually being done with them. But at Shabbos ben Hashmoshes, a time that's very close to Shabbos, a time that is outside of the Sheishes and Mibreshis, here is a time that we could recognize and appreciate even the less significant things that the Avos created, that they too have a great deal of significance.